If to fans who hate America as bribery to continue. If you hate America and everything she stands for, you get a free Xbox from an ignorant thug. Yup, you read that correctly. Washington Redskins running backs Keith Marshall and Rob Kelly bought a 10-year-old boy a new Xbox when they saw him shopping at a Sterling, Virginia GameStop store. Jaden Watts told local media that he was checking out the Xbox price when Marshall and Kelly complimented him for wearing a Colin Kaepernick jersey. Kelly said that Marshall heard Jaden talking about saving up for the game console when the players offered to buy it for him. Jaden admitted to Marshall that he's really a Cowboys fan. He said he admires how Kaepernick wasn't afraid to show what he thought. "Yeah, kid. The truth about your hero is that he found a Muslim girlfriend who convinced him that $110 million a year wasn't enough. And because he's really not that great a ball player, the stunt ended his career. Very admirable indeed." Kaepernick has been out of the NFL since he decided to make a spectacle out of himself by kneeling during the national anthem last season and wearing socks depicting police officers as pigs to bring attention to so-called racial injustices against murderers, drug dealers, and gang members. More than 250 NFL players knelt during the anthem over the weekend. The protests were reignited after President Donald Trump's speech at an Alabama rally last Friday when he called out these spoiled rich thugs for what they are and called for their immediate firing. The Daily Wire reports. President Barack Obama has no problem making disgusting, untrue assertions about cops being racist at a funeral for murdered cops, yet does not give major speeches on the epidemic of black-on-black crime. Here are 7 statistics you need to know about black-on-black crime that the president will not address. 1. Data shows that 93% of black homicide victims are killed by other blacks. The left's rebuttal is that 84% of white homicide victims are killed by other whites, but the Wall Street Journal's Jason Riley points out that the white crime rate is much lower than the black rate. 2. According to Riley, blacks commit violent crimes at 7 to 10 times the rate that whites do. Blacks committed 52% of homicides between 1980 and 2008, despite composing just 13% of the population. Across the same time frame, whites committed 45% of homicides while composing 77% of the population, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics. Here are some more statistics from the FBI. In 2013, the FBI has black criminals carrying out 38% of murders, compared to 31.1% for whites. The offender's race was unknown in 29.1% of cases. What about violent crime more generally? FBI arrest rates are one way into this. Over the last 3 years of data, 2011 to 2013, to 38.5% of people arrested for murder, manslaughter, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault were black. 3. Black crime is even more prevalent in the country's largest cities and counties. Heather MacDonald writes in her book The War on Cops, How the New Attack on Law and Order Makes Everyone Less Safe, that in Chicago, Illinois, blacks committed 76% of all homicides, despite composing 35% of the city's population. Blacks also accounted for 78% of all juvenile arrests. Whites, who composed 28% of the city's population, committed 4% of its homicides and 3.5% of its juvenile arrests. Hispanics, who composed 30% of the city's population, committed 19% of its homicides and 18% of its juvenile arrests. Another eye-opening fact from MacDonald's research is that only 26% of murder cases were solved in Chicago. Blacks are 10% of the population in Los Angeles, California, but commit 42% of its robberies and 34% of its felonies. Whites make up 29% of the city's population, and commit 5% of its robberies and 13% of its felonies. In New York City, blacks committed 75% of all shootings, 70% of all robberies, and 66% of all violent crime, despite only composing 23% of the population, said MacDonald in a Hillsdale speech. Additionally, 2009 Bureau of Justice Statistics numbers show that in 2009, Blacks were charged with 62% of robberies, 57% of murders and 45% of assaults in the 75 biggest counties in the country, despite only comprising roughly 15% of the population in these counties. 4. There were almost 6,000 blacks killed by other blacks in 2015. By contrast, only 258 blacks were killed by police gunfire that year. 5. The percentage of blacks arrested for crimes is consistent with police reports. This is according to the National Crime Victimization Survey, as well as this 1985 study. Even allowing for the existence of discrimination in the criminal justice system, the higher rates of crime among Black Americans cannot be denied, wrote James Q. Wilson and Richard Bernstein in their classic 1985 study, Crime and Human Nature. Every study of crime using official data shows blacks to be overrepresented among persons arrested, convicted, and imprisoned for street crimes. This was true decades before the authors put it to paper, and it remains the case decades later. The overrepresentation of blacks among arrested persons persists throughout the criminal justice system, wrote Wilson and Bernstein. Though prosecutors and judges may well make discriminatory judgments, such decisions do not account for more than a small fraction of the overrepresentation of blacks in prison. This data disproves the notion that racism is what drives higher rates of arrests among the blacks than among whites or broader America. 6. According to Riley, black crime rates were lower in the 1940s and 1950s, when black poverty was higher and racial discrimination was rampant and legal. If it's not racism and poverty that are blamed for the high black crime rate, then what is? 7. According to MacDonald, a straight line can be drawn between family breakdown and youth violence. As economist Thomas Sowell points out, before the 1960s most black children were raised in two-parent families. In 2013, over 72% of blacks were born out of wedlock. In Cook County, which Chicago belongs to, 79% of blacks were born to single mothers in 2003, while only 15% of whites were born to single mothers. Until that gap closes, the crime gap won't close, either, writes MacDonald. Isn't this a heartwarming story? If you hate America, the police, and support an ungrateful thug like this failed 49ers quarterback, you get a reward. If you want to really impress people, start locking arms to bring attention to the fact that the large majority of young black men aren't in fact killed by the police, nor by whites. They are killed by other young black men, and also while you're at it, bring attention to the fact that Planned Parenthood over 270 black babies per day. Thank you for watching this video. What do you think about this? Share this on Facebook and Twitter along with your comments.